One was a vigia, which is what's still called, right? And that's the place where people do most of the worship services and that sort of thing. And then there's also a upostka, or sala, which is a call for special important work done by monks themselves. This is where monks do the fortnightly chanting of the Patimok, which is the rules that monks need to follow, and where they do other important formal acts of the monks. Trong cái đó.
Erik just back in.
Oh, can you open? Okay. So, all right. Okay. So these buildings used to be kept separately, right? In the modern period, and probably for about 100 years, they have tended to be combined. They have tended to be combined into 2 floors. And it's a very important building. There's a very special ceremony called a sīmā ceremony, a boundary installation ceremony, which is very complicated and which they have, I think, a 16 DVD record of for this temple. It was done, I think, at Binchhaya to Pipon Rambai. It was done in 2007. And it's a long DVD. I have it if you want to check it out. And it's very exciting. One of the things that's very exciting about this temple, if we get a chance, we should go back downstairs for just a moment, is that there are 9 stones that create a sīmā ceremony, and they are put around the vigia, but then there's one sīmā stone, the ingakil, which is the most important, the central sīmā stone, and that's placed in the middle of the temple, and they're all buried. There's a special ceremony where they're all hanging suspended over the pits, and you do a ceremony and then everybody has a machete and a hammer, or a cudgel, and at the same time they hit the machete with the cudgel, and the string's cut, and all the stone, and then it's, the sīmā's done. Mien sīmā now, right? We have a sīmā, we have a boundary, and we can do the important formal acts that are important up here. Without a sīmā, you cannot have a place like this upstairs room where you do formal acts. Without a sīmā, you cannot ordain new monks. So having sīmās is a very important and sometimes a political part of monastic history. If somebody gets ordained in a sīmā that's not correct, other people can say, well, you're not a real monk, right? So it's very important that a sīmā be done properly and that it be recognized by the entire Sangha, right? You may have noticed that there are a lot of Buddhas on the altars. That's a characteristic of Buddhist temples in general. Not just Mahayana Buddhists who have many Buddhas, right? But even Theravada Buddhist altars have many Buddhas. It's not that there are different Buddhas. These are all representations of the same Buddha or the same Bodhisattva on his way to enlightenment, right? But you can see that they have different characteristics. So for instance, the Buddha at the very top has a halo, a multicolored halo. He's on a throne. You see him sitting on the throne, right? And he is seated in meditation. Right? He's seated in meditation. He's got one hand down, but he's not touching the ground, so it's not bhumisparsha. But he's standing there, and then in front of him, you have another Buddha. Same guy. But he's also seated on the throne. He's in the same position. It's a little less fancy. I would direct you. We're going to come back to this image with a staircase. Do you see the Buddha in the front of the halo? Do you see the Buddha coming down the staircase behind him? Same Buddha. Now look at the altar. Do you see similarities? Right? We will come back to that. Would you like to hear the story of the Buddha's life according to the murals in this temple? Okay. Let's start over here, which is where we should start. Students, in my Introduction to Buddhism class, which comes first, birth or death? Death. And therefore we start in heaven. Because everyone is reborn. The Bodhisattva lived many thousands of lives before he was born as a person to become a Buddha. Many, many, many thousands of lives. According to the story, sometimes he was born as an animal even. Sometimes he had terrible lives, and he did very hard work over many, many lives to improve himself, to become a more moral person, to perfect, the word is to perfect, certain moralities, right? But then he was born in heaven, a specific heaven called Tushita, right? And he's born there, and if you're born in heaven, stuff is good, right? Your life is good in heaven, right? He's sitting on the throne, he's got a little crown, people are hanging out with him, he's got friends, he's got servants, he never wants for any food or comfort. He's going to live many, many thousands of years, right? He's got a very good lifespan. It's a good time in heaven. By the way, this is also a good explanation for why some people are jerks. You can only become enlightened as a human being, but you can be reborn in heavens or hells. Somebody who is like, oh, I'm all, you can just say, oh, straight from heaven. Right? These jerks got way too used to comfort and expectations of privilege and power. Right? They've been too long in heaven. Right? Humanity is where it's at. Right? So we should be humble. We shouldn't be like people in heaven. We shouldn't be the jerks. Right? And we should try not to end up in hell. But here he is. He's in the Tushita heaven. And what are these people doing? They're coming to pray to him. They're begging him because they know he's very special. They're begging him to take birth as a human being, to become an enlightened Buddha, and to teach what will become Buddhism to the world. And so he says, okay, and he dies. That's where our story starts. Buddhism starts with death because it is death that causes birth. Technically, it is the desire at the moment of death for more life that causes birth. That is an action. They're actions of body, of mind, of speech. Right? The action of desiring life at that very last moment of death causes another birth, influenced and conditioned by all your karma. Right? This is from a moment called the Chuti Bhavan, right? Okay, so he dies. And then he is born. He is born to a great king named Dasaratha, King Ten Chariots. Right? And his wife, Mahamaya, Great Maya. Right? As is true of many stories, think about many like folk stories or other types of stories, mom dies quick. Why might mom die quickly in many of these stories? Maybe it's just because it happened. It's true. That's a good reason, right? But in terms of telling a story for a reason, there's a reason that sometimes moms die early in these stories. And it's to show that the child did it on their own. Right? They weren't brought there. They weren't pushed there by their parents. Right? They did it on their own. The Buddha is a person who did this on his own. Now, not alone. He has many lifetimes with many of the same people. He's reborn over and over and over again with people like Sariputra, Mahamoggallana, his friend and cousin Ananda, my favorite, right? And so he's born again and again with these people, and he has different relations with them. But he's doing this work, and he's improving himself over many lifetimes. And he's born to Mahamaya. You can see that she's holding on to the limb of a tree as she gives birth. In the story, the limb slowly lowers so that she can reach it. In the Pali, it's actually a gorgeous section where it's like, you can see frame by frame, it's all very cinematic, frame by frame, the tree limb lowers, and she reaches up to grab it and support herself. It's a very beautiful, beautiful section. And she gives birth standing up, which is a thing you can actually do. And then the Bodhisattva, you all know about calling the Buddha the Bodhisattva, because he's not enlightened yet, right? So the Bodhisattva immediately on birth takes 7 steps, which is a thing all normal children do. And every time he steps down, a lotus flower pops up out of the ground before he can touch the ground. Right? And he steps on the lotus flowers, 7 of them. And he gets to the end and he puts his finger up, which is again something every child does, and he says his first words, which are things every child says right after birth. And he says, I am born for enlightenment. I will not be born again. Right from the beginning, he's made a vow. Now, I have a little brother who was born very, very big and strong, and immediately after birth, he actually turned over. And that was the only time the doctor said that had ever happened, right? So what the Buddha does here is actually quite interesting and unusual, right? Okay, good. Let's go to the next one. Shortly after the Buddha's birth, or the Bodhisattva's birth, the king wants to know his future. So he does what normally happens. So usually there's a waiting period before you have a naming ceremony. And the waiting period is probably because of the incredible rate of child and infant mortality. Right? I think it's real hard for many people in today's world to think about how frequently children die. right? The norm is almost to have your child die for much of history, right? And so you've got to wait. You've got to be patient. And I just want you to take a moment to absorb that fact and think about how that changes what your attitude towards grief, your experience of loss might be. Right? At the age of 21, you should have lost a few siblings, maybe some others, right? So think about that, right? That's the norm, that's the average, right? And so here we go. He gets this guy from, you see all the tiger skin stuff? He's a Brahmin ascetic. So he's from out in the forest, he's doing weird stuff, he's got a top knot, right? And he's doing all these crazy asceticism, but he's got power, he can see into the future, right? And so he takes the baby, and he puts him on his head, which is a way of showing extreme respect. You'll sometimes see people putting scriptures on top of their head, right? Or Buddha images, right? And so he puts the baby on top of his head, and he says, oh! He starts to cry. And the king's very alarmed. He's like, the guy who's telling my baby's future is crying? That's scary, right? And he says, why are you crying? And the sage says, well, I've seen this kid's future, and it's going to be one of two things. He is either going to be a great world-ruling king. And the father's like, well, that's what I am. That sounds great to me. You know, like father, like son. Let's have my kid be a big king, right? This is awesome, right? And then Asita continues, and he says, or he will be a great teacher who teaches the world how to seek liberation. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard people in America use the word academic. Have you ever heard it used as a compliment? You have not, right? The father has the same attitude. He's like, teacher? No, thank you. Right? That doesn't make any money. It's about loser stuff. It's not strong and powerful and wealthy. You don't get to have, lots of kids and wives and wealth. That's no good. I want him to be a king. But there's a choice. The king has to figure out how to make his kid navigate to the right choice to become a king, right? And so what he does is he creates a palace. Actually, he creates 3 palaces. And inside these palaces, which the baby is never allowed to leave, right? He lives entirely in this world, this enclosed world. Nobody old is allowed to be in the palaces. Nobody sick is allowed to be in the palaces. No death, right? Nothing unpleasant is allowed. Only the perfect foods and desires of everything's perfect, right? And he gets to the age of 30 like this. Can you imagine being at the age of 30 and not realizing that people get sick or old or die? That's quite amazing, right? Before that happens, we have the baby Buddha's very first experience with meditation. Right? The king is out there doing his plowing. He's starting the plowing season. Now, the king does not usually sweat behind a plow. This is a ritual, right? Where the king says, let's plow. I'm standing on the plow, right? So let's plow, and he plows ritually a field. And then everybody else does most of the work, right? But the king plows, right? And they have to leave the bodhisattva alone under a tree while the king is doing all that. While he's there, he enters into the first stage of concentration meditation, the first jhana, right? And he's like so deep in it, they forget the kid. They forgot they left him under a tree. This happened to me when I was 2 weeks old, by the way. My parents left me under a coconut tree. It was very dangerous. And they left him, and then when they go running back to find him, he's hovering in midair, deeply absorbed in meditation. Wild! Okay, let's move on. Remember that palace? So he has never seen anything bad in his whole life. But he does have a friend. His friend is his charioteer. Now, I will just say in general, if a rich person's best friend is somebody they pay, be careful around that person. Right? But the bodhisattva is different. Okay? His best friend is a servant of his. We're just going to let that go. His best friend is a servant of his named Chanda, and he's his charioteer. And he says to Chanda, hey buddy, I'm kind of interested in what's happening outside those walls. How about we take a little trip? And Chanda says, you can't do that. Your dad says no. Come on, you're my guy. Come on, Chanda, let's go. And they go outside the walls. They sneak out. And they see 4 things. It's called the 4 sights. The first thing they see is they see an old man. And he's kind of, or sick. I think he's a sick man first, right? He's a sick man. And he's a guy who's like, he's sick. Like when I say sick, I mean really sick, like dysentery sick. Right? Like very obviously ill, like wasting away, physically just obviously badly off, right? And the bodhisattva says to Chanda, hey, what is that? And Chanda says, well, that's a sick man. Well, that's not good. Wait, a sick man? I'm a man. Is that going to happen to me? Chanda says, yes. Prince. Everybody gets sick. Okay? Then they see an old man. He's walking along with a cane. He's bent over, like really bent over. Maybe he's got no teeth. Right? Really big with a little teeth. Okay. And the Bodhisattva says, oh, what's that, Chanda? He says, well, that's an old man. Man, I don't know. Is that good? Do I get old? Yes, Prince. Everybody gets old. That is going to happen to you too. He's really shaken by this stuff, right? Like sickness, age. I'm perfect right now. What's that? No. Right? He's his third sight. He sees some people carrying something lengthwise. It's about the side length of a human being, and then he says, "Oh my gosh, there's a head under there." That's a dead man, says Chanda. And the prince says, "Dead? What's that mean?" It means there's no life, nothing. You cannot walk, you cannot speak, you cannot think. Is that going to happen to me? Yes, everybody dies. Now, some of you saw Sesame Street as kids. One of these things is not like the other. Three of these things are kind of the same, right? The one thing of the four sights that is not like the others, the last sight the Bodhisattva sees, is somebody who looks like these gentlemen. Right? Somebody who is... Somebody who looks like this gentleman. He has shaved his head. Sometimes in Cambodia they shave the eyebrows. Right? He's wearing his robe. Right? Actually, at the time it was a different robe. This robe is a very special robe, special to Buddhism. But they were wearing a robe. And they were not Buddhist monks. There were many people at the time who were called shramanas, right? Who were doing all sorts of types of religious experimentation. And he was happy. The Bodhisattva sees this guy, and he's got a bowl, a begging bowl. He's got his robes, he's got his hair shaved, and he's happy. And the Bodhisattva says, "What is that?" And Chanda says, "Oh, Prince, that's a shrama." He says, "That's a good thing." So that's a good thing. And so the prince has seen three terrible things and one good thing. That's a pretty easy choice. He's going to go for the good thing. So he says to his dad, "Hey, Dad, can I become a shramana? Can I go live in the forest and starve myself and do weird asceticisms? Can I do that, please? I don't want to be a king anymore." Well, the king's answer is, "No, you can't do that." And so they do more things. They get the prince married. The prince gets married. He marries a beautiful, wonderful woman named Yashodhara, whose name means the holder of honor or the holder of glory. Right? It's a great name, Yashodhara. And he has a child named Rakula. Rakula is not a great name. It means ball and chain. It means fetter. Right? He names his kid ball and chain. Like something like a manacle, something that's tying me to the world. Right? This is a good indication of how Buddhism tends to think about relationships. It's not that relationships are bad or that you shouldn't be good in relationships. You should be. And we all have relationships. Right? But ultimately, the path to salvation does not include the sorts of familial responsibilities and attachments that so many of us consider the norm. That's why people can become monks. They cut themselves off formally from those attachments. They try and reduce and decrease them. And so one night the Bodhisattva says, "I have to do this thing. I have to follow my intentions." And so he wakes up in the middle of the night, much like you did tonight, this morning, right? And he snuck out of the room, just like you did with your roommates, trying not to wake anybody up. He sneaks out. And he goes with Chanda outside the palace, and he shaves his head. He takes off his jewelry and his crown and his sword, and he gives them to Chanda so that Chanda can give them back to the king and the queen so that they know that he didn't kill the prince and take his stuff, right? And so they give it back to the king and the queen so they know he's not dead, he hasn't been murdered. But everybody's very sad. The Bodhisattva has gone. There he is, cutting off his hair. You can see that there are heavenly beings, including the king of the gods, there on the left, right? Indra, waiting to receive the relics. Right? These are some of the first relics of the Bodhisattva.